Thanks, Christina. We're in a series discussing, is God really out there? And as we discussed last week, it's not so much about proofs, because even science doesn't seek proof. Science is always questioning. Science is always reevaluating. Science never claims to prove anything. Science just says, here's the evidence, and what can we understand from the evidence that we're perceiving, but with the understanding that our understanding is going to constantly change as we grow with more evidence and more evidence. What we're talking about here isn't so much the proofs, although I think there is evidence for the existence of God. What we're sort of talking about here are the implications if there's no God. Last week we talked about if God's not the creator, if there is no creator, what are the implications for us with regard to purpose? If we're just a chemical accident that happened, then really there is no purpose. Because purpose comes from a plan, and a plan comes from a planner. If there's no planner, then there's no plan. If there's no plan, then there's really no purpose. Everything's just meaningless. And the question is that what we intrinsically believe about our lives? That we're essentially meaningless. And we discussed that whole issue last week. This week, I want to go more onto the idea of the whole issue of morality and right and wrong. Because who defines that? And that's something we really struggle with in our society, is who gets to choose what's right and who gets to choose what's wrong. And we're battling that on so many different fronts, and even personally we struggle with that. Again, if there is no God, and we are just a chemical accident again, unplanned, no real sense or purposing, that it's just a bunch of molecules combining in this way that eventually produced us, then is there really even any such thing as right and wrong? Is there any such thing as morality? Or is it simply we're saying that we're just responding to this chemical stimulus that goes through our bodies, that enjoys certain sensations over other sensations, and that collectively as a society we call those sensations that we like, those preferred feelings, we're calling right and wrong. Because if we're just a chemical reaction, and that's really what defines us as people, then really my sense of right and wrong and our sense of right and wrong isn't really a right and wrong. It's just how we feel about things. Based on the chemical interactions that's going on in our brains and our bodies. It's just a sensation that then defines for me what I think is right and wrong. And if there's no right and wrong, then essentially what we're saying is society determines right and wrong. In other words, if there's no God who's deciding right and wrong, then what we're saying is that society then determines what is right and wrong, and that really what we are doing as a group of people as we come together is that we're just going to choose to agree upon certain values. And so that as a society, we're a gathering of people that say, we hold these values in common, and so we're going to support these values, and we're going to enforce these values, but with the understanding that our values may change because people's perspective changes. And if enough people change, then suddenly our values can change from here, and our values can suddenly move over here, and the values here can be completely different than the values here. We've experienced that, haven't we, in society? Haven't we had, at times, complete, total shifts in what we understand as right and wrong? Because society changes, and if society determines right and wrong, then there is no absolute right and wrong. Right and wrong is going to keep changing and evolving because our perspectives on things and how we feel about things changes. And so there is no absolute right and wrong. It's just whatever we collectively choose to agree. But I got to confess, I've got a few tensions with that. Because what happens when one society has different values than another society? And what happens when those societies clash? Because is one society's values more right than another society's values then? And so then the question is, do I really have a right to look at that society's value systems and condemn it when that's what they've chosen to affirm? That's what they've chosen to agree to because that's their values. But my society over has these values. And so then, can I really judge them for their values? Can I really say that I'm right and they're wrong if there is no God and we're just collectively doing this together as a joint exercise? Well, if that's the case, then really the northern states should have never told the southern states that slavery was wrong. Because isn't that what happened, is the southern states had this mindset that slavery is okay, and the northern states were saying, no, we don't agree. And so now one society's cultural values clashed with another society's cultural values, and it created a civil war. Should the North just have simply said, no, we'll let them have their cultural values, and if they want to say slavery is okay. Now, the slaves didn't necessarily agree with that, but that's okay. They weren't the majority. You see, now even within the South, there was a tension of social values, but the majority determines the values, right? And so then the rest just have to go with those values. But what happens when there's that clash? In other words, Martin Luther never really should have tried to change the cultural values of the states with regard to racism. Because what he was essentially saying was, your collective value system is wrong. Well, wait a second, how can he say that when that society determined its value system? And yet he did, and eventually society then did shift. But who was he to say that their value system of racism was wrong? Or the Nazis that believed that executing the Jews, millions of Jews, was the morally right thing to do. And that's what they stood for, was that it was the morally right thing to do was to execute the Jews. Well, who's to say that their cultural value system was wrong? If there is no God and each society determines its values, well then you got to respect their values, even if it clashes with your values. ISIS right now believes that it is morally right to execute those that do not believe in their version of Islam. That's their cultural value system. Are we okay affirming that? Or who am I to say that their cultural values are wrong? That my cultural values are right? You see, we start coming into some tensions here. And even if I bring it down to a personal system, like our society here might have a certain value system, but what if that conflicts with my value system? What if I want the freedom to exercise my value systems, even if the rest of the society says, no, that's not their values? Well, why should your value system affect my value system? Shouldn't I be free to do whatever I want? And isn't that the tensions that we're dealing with in society right now with the whole view of marijuana and drugs and with regard to euthanasia, with regard to assisted suicide, with regard to abortion, with regard to all these different issues that are moral tension issues? Well, I have my beliefs. Who are you to tell me what to do? Well, this is the tension that we run into with regard to the idea that a society or a collective group of people determine the values. Well, why should your values hinder my values? Because you'll never have any one group of people, in any group of people, you'll never have everyone with the exact same values. So who wins out? Who determines right and wrong? And is there actually an objective truth? Or is there a definitive right and wrong that applies to everyone universally? And if so, where does that come from? Or is it just up to everyone to make up their own decisions about what they want to do? Well, that's what we've got to struggle through. What do you think? How would you answer that? Well, we have a little video here to show you.